Let's now get some perspective on what exactly this means from a maritime and governance scholar who's also an advocate of the High Court. We bring in Njoki Mboce at this time. And Njoki, thank you for making time this evening. In a nutshell, this has been described by all and sundry as a loss for Kenya. What happens next? Because we know that Kenya had vowed not to accept the ruling, and the court, it seems, does not have a way to enforce it.
Well, thank you very much, Wahiga, for having me tonight. Apologies for my hoarse voice. I'm actually having a cold. So I'll start by acknowledging the president's position that it is best for the country and for everyone else to actually take time and analyze that particular decision, because in truth, and not just looking at the decision alone, but also looking at the process and the manner in which Kenya has, especially most recently, pronounced herself on this particular issue, I would say it is not accurate to say that this is a loss for Kenya. Kenya has actually consistently expressed her position as an African leader, even in terms of thought process, and to also encourage regional peace and cohesion. So for us, I think for Kenya, it has been a very consistent message that lets us explore other alternatives. And so that when you look at that particular court decision, you will find that even the court has not, has not entirely agreed, as has been reported by one of the reporters today. The court didn't also entirely agree with what Somalia presented. So saying that it is a complete loss for Kenya, I think that's a huge and gross misrepresentation of both the fact of what is contained in the judgment as well as the reality on the ground. You will see that Kenya has made great strides even from this particular process. Some losses here and there, including perhaps,
I mean, Njoki, we could argue on semantics, depending on how you look at it, glass half full, glass half empty. But by and large, the ICJ ruled largely in favor of Somalia. What does this then mean for Kenya in terms of options, bearing in mind, foreign affairs last week and by withdrawing in March as well? The clear message was that we will not respect the decision of the court. So what's the way forward from a legal perspective?
You see, Wahiga, I actually don't see the glass full, glass half question here, because even when you're looking at the aspect of enforcement of the decisions of ICJ, it is not, you see, the ICJ, as with any other courts, doesn't necessarily have its own self-implementing mechanism. So for Somalia, for instance, to be able to get, quote unquote, the gains of this particular decision, certain things will have to happen. So it is one thing to have a judgment at hand. It is one thing to be able, in the fullness of time, to get what is there. Because as you will see, the issue of maritime boundaries in Africa as a continent is not necessarily a settled question. So you may potentially find other institutions, including the African Union, wanting to come in and intervene on certain fronts, because especially when you're looking at the implementation aspect, the ICJ would not be able to implement. The UN General Assembly also has a compelling mechanism, but again, it takes too much to get the UN General Assembly to do that. And there would have to be a compelling case made. So, and that is why I say really, even when you look at the legal aspects, because implementation is also a legal aspect. So the fact that you have a judgment at hand, the legality also of your ability to implement it is a fact.
There's a lot you're saying in very few words. Briefly, my last question to you on this would be, did it have to get to this? Couldn't we have figured out a previous mutual agreement that would have ensured that we don't have to go the route of this court to get where we are this evening? Did it have to get to this, in your view?
It did not have to get to this point, Wahiga, and all is still not lost at this point. I say it did not have to get to this point because even when you look at what is happening right now, we do have countries such as Seychelles and Mauritius that have gotten into some form of arrangements when we look at their certain contested areas with respect to maritime territory. So it is not unusual to call upon states to agree on use and even demarcation and delimitation of maritime boundaries, we didn't have to get to this point.
Okay.
Nevertheless, it is not the end of the world. I mean, there are certain things, as I have indicated, that then we can be able to do to make sure that we move forward together as not just between Kenya and Somalia, but even as a region. I mean, there's more to this because you see, we are not the only two countries that share a boundary, a maritime boundary. And this could have potential implications to other countries too.
Njoki.
So it's not just a face of it kind of position that anybody could want to take.
Njoki, this is a fascinating conversation that I'm sure we'll continue to have in the coming days. Thanks so much for lending your expertise to this. Njoki Mboce, who's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and also a maritime and governance scholar.